The rain hammered against the metal roof of Jake Morrison's garage like 1,000 tiny fists. He wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag and looked at the clock on the wall. 9:30 at night. Most people in New Denver would be settling down for the evening, but Jake had learned long ago that spacecraft don't break down on schedule. The small repair shop sat on the edge of town, where the neat rows of colony houses gave way to industrial buildings and scrapyards. Jake had chosen this spot because the land was cheap and the neighbors didn't complain about the noise of engines being tested at all hours. His reputation for fixing anything that could fly had spread throughout the sector, bringing him customers from 3 different star systems. Jake pulled his coveralls tighter against the cold and walked over to examine the freight hauler he'd been working on. The ship belonged to Captain Murphy, a gruff trader who hauled supplies between the outer colonies. The main engine had been making a grinding noise that worried Murphy enough to make an unscheduled stop. As Jake bent down to check his work on the engine housing, he heard something unusual over the sound of rain. It was a scraping noise, like metal being dragged across concrete. He straightened up and listened carefully. The sound was coming from outside, near the front of his shop. Jake grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the main entrance. The motion sensors should have turned on the exterior lights, but they had been acting up lately. He made a mental note to fix them tomorrow. The scraping sound continued, getting closer to his door. When Jake opened the heavy garage door, his flashlight beam revealed something that made him freeze. An alien was pulling himself across the wet concrete toward his shop. The creature used only his upper arms, dragging his lower body behind him like dead weight. His blue-green skin glistened with rainwater, and his breathing was labored from the effort. Jake had seen many different alien species during his years on New Denver. The colony world was a trading hub where humans mixed with dozens of other races. But he had never seen one of these tall, thin beings with the distinctive ridge that ran down their skulls. The alien's clothing was torn and dirty, and Jake could see that his legs were completely limp. "Hey there," Jake called out, stepping into the rain. "You need help?" The alien looked up at him with large, dark eyes that seemed to hold both pride and desperation. "I am looking for the human who fixes ships," he said in accented but clear English. "They told me in town that you are Jake Morrison." "That's me," Jake said, moving closer. "But you shouldn't be out here in this weather. Can you make it inside?" The alien hesitated for a moment, as if accepting help was difficult for him. Then he nodded once. Jake bent down and carefully helped the creature to his feet, supporting his weight as they made their way into the warm garage. The alien's legs dragged uselessly behind them, but he tried to maintain as much dignity as possible. Jake helped him settle onto a workbench. That was just the right height to serve as a seat. The alien's breathing was heavy, and Jake could see that the journey to his shop had taken everything out of him. He grabbed a clean towel and handed it to his unexpected visitor. "Thank you," the alien said, drying his face and head ridge. "I am called Crix. I am of the Zephyrian people." Jake nodded, though he wasn't familiar with that species. "Nice to meet you, Crix. What brings you out on a night like this?" Crix was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his useless legs. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was a pilot. I flew mining ships for my people, searching for rare minerals in asteroid fields. It was dangerous work, but I was good at it. I had been flying for 15 years without a serious accident." "What happened?" Jake asked gently. 3 weeks ago, I was working a new asteroid field near the Kepler system. My ship's sensors detected a rich vein of trilithium deep inside a large asteroid. I flew into a tunnel to get a closer look, but the rock was not stable. Part of the tunnel collapsed, and my ship was crushed. Crix's hands clenched into fists as he continued. I was trapped for 6 hours before a rescue team found me. The ship's hull had been crushed around my pilot chair, and it had damaged my spine. The human doctors on the rescue ship did what they could, but they said the damage was permanent. I will never walk again. Jake felt a pang of sympathy for the alien. He had known several pilots who had been injured in accidents, and he understood how devastating it could be for someone whose life revolved around flying. I'm sorry to hear that, Crix, but there are treatments, right? Physical therapy, mechanical, aids? Crix shook his head sadly. You do not understand. Among my people, there is no place for those who cannot contribute to the hunt for minerals and exploration of space. We are a species that lives to fly among the stars. Those who cannot fly are considered incomplete. That seems harsh, Jake said carefully. He didn't want to insult the aliens' culture, but the idea of abandoning someone because of an injury struck him as wrong. It is our way, Crix said simply. My family has already performed the ritual of separation. To them, I am already dead. The mining company terminated my contract and gave me enough credits to survive for a few months. Then they left me here on your world. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing what he had heard. The idea that an entire species would simply abandon their injured members was difficult for him to understand. In human society, people with disabilities were supported and helped to find new ways to contribute. The thought of Crix being left alone on a strange world, unable to return to the stars he loved, made Jake's chest tighten with anger. So what are you looking for from me? Jake asked. Krx reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small device that looked like a credit chip. I have been asking around the colony about spacecraft. Most people told me that ships are too expensive for someone like me to afford. But a few mentioned that you sometimes work with older ships and salvaged parts. I was hoping you might have something small and cheap that I could buy. Jake took the credit chip and glanced at the display. The amount was modest enough to buy some basic supplies or perhaps a small repair job. It was nowhere near enough to purchase even the most basic spacecraft. What would you do with a ship? Jake asked. I would try to reach the nearest Zephyrian outpost, Crix said. It is 3 systems away, but if I could get there, I might be able to find work in a ground-based facility. Maintenance, perhaps, or communications. It would not be flying, but it would be something. Jake studied the alien's face. He could see the slim hope there, mixed with the expectation of disappointment. Crix had probably been turned away from dozens of other places before finding his way to Jake's garage. The problem is, Jake said slowly, most ships aren't designed for someone with your condition. The controls require full mobility, and the pilot chairs are built for people who can use their legs. Crix's shoulders sagged. I know. I had hoped that perhaps there was something older, simpler. I can still use my arms and hands perfectly well. Jake looked at the alien for a long moment. Something about Crix's situation reminded him of his own early days on New Denver. He had arrived with little money and few prospects, but other people had given him chances when he needed them most. Now he was successful enough to own his own business and help others. Let me think about this, Jake said finally. I might have an idea, but I need to check on some things first. Do you have a place to stay tonight? Crix nodded. There is a shelter in town that takes in stranded travelers. It is not comfortable, but it is dry. Good, come back tomorrow evening and we'll talk more about your situation. And Crix? Jake waited until the alien looked up at him. Don't give up hope yet. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones nobody has thought of before. As Jake helped Crix make his way back out into the rain, his mind was already working on a problem that most people would consider impossible. But Jake Morrison had built his reputation on solving impossible problems, and he had a feeling that this might be his most important challenge yet. Jake spent the entire night staring at the ceiling of his small apartment above the garage. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Crix dragging himself through the rain, abandoned by his own people simply because he couldn't walk. The image made Jake's stomach twist with anger and sadness. By dawn, Jake had made his decision. He would build Crix a ship. Not buy him one, not find him a used one, but actually build one from scratch. The idea was crazy, maybe even impossible, but Jake had never backed down from a challenge before. He spent the morning walking through his scrapyard, looking at the collection of broken ships and spare parts he had gathered over the years. Most people saw junk, but Jake saw possibilities. An old mining shuttle had a good fusion reactor. A crashed fighter had excellent sensor arrays. A decommissioned transport had life support systems that still worked perfectly. The biggest challenge would be the control system. Every ship Jake had ever worked on required the pilot to use both hands and both feet. Throttle controls, steering pedals, emergency switches, they were all designed for people with full mobility. Crix would need something completely different. Jake pulled out his tablet and started sketching ideas. What if the ship could be controlled entirely with hand movements and thoughts? He had heard about experimental neural interfaces that could read brain signals, but they were expensive and unreliable. Still, it might be possible to create a simpler version. When evening came, Jake heard the familiar scraping sound outside his garage. He opened the door to find Crix pulling himself across the concrete again. This time, Jake was ready with a small wheeled cart he had built during the day. "This should make things easier," Jake said, helping Crix onto the cart. "I've been thinking about your problem all day." Crix looked surprised but grateful as Jake pushed him into the garage. "You have news for me?" "I have a proposal," Jake said. "I want to build you a ship. Not buy you one, but actually build one designed specifically for your needs." Crix stared at him in disbelief. "That is impossible. No such ship exists anywhere. In the galaxy? The engineering challenges alone would be overwhelming." "Maybe," Jake said with a grin, "but I've never been good at accepting impossible. Let me show you what I'm thinking." Jake led Crix over to his workbench, where he had spread out his sketches and notes. The design showed a small, single-pilot ship with a unique cockpit layout. Instead of traditional controls, the pilot would sit in a specialized chair that could read muscle movements and brain signals. "The idea is simple," Jake explained. "We eliminate all the foot controls and design everything around what you can do, not what you can't do. The ship would be controlled through hand gestures, eye movements, and thought patterns." Crix studied the drawings with growing amazement. "This is unlike anything I have ever seen. But surely the technology for such a system does not exist." "Some of it does," Jake said. "Medical implants already use neural interfaces to help paralyzed patients control artificial limbs. The military has been experimenting with thought-controlled weapon systems. I think I can adapt those technologies for ship controls. Even if you could build such a system, the cost would be enormous," Crix said. "I do not have nearly enough credits for such a project." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about the money. I've got plenty of spare parts, and I enjoy a good challenge. Besides, if this works, it could help a lot of other people in similar situations." Crix was quiet for a long moment, and Jake could see tears forming in his large, dark eyes. "Why would you do this for me? I am not even of your species. My own people have abandoned me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Jake said simply. "Everyone deserves a chance to follow their dreams, even if they have to find a new way to do it." Over the next few days, Jake threw himself into the project with an intensity that surprised even him. He worked 18-hour days, taking breaks only to eat and catch a few hours of sleep. Crix came to the garage every evening, watching the progress with fascination and growing hope. The first challenge was building the ship's frame. Jake decided to use the hull of an old courier ship that had been damaged in a landing accident. The ship was small but sturdy, with enough room for a single pilot and basic supplies. Jake spent 3 days cutting and welding, reshaping the interior. To accommodate the specialized control system. Next came the pilot's chair. Jake designed it to hold Crix's lower body securely while giving him complete freedom of movement for his arms and head. The chair would be connected to sensors that could detect muscle tension, heartbeat, and brain activity. Jake had to study Zephyrian anatomy to understand how Crix's nervous system worked, but he found the research fascinating. The neural interface was the most difficult part. Jake contacted a friend who worked with medical implants and managed to get his hands on some experimental brain-reading equipment. The technology was designed to help paralyzed patients control computers, but Jake thought he could modify it to control a spaceship. "This is incredible," Crix said one evening as Jake showed him the interface headset. "It looks like something from a science fiction story." "All the best technology starts out looking impossible," Jake said. "The trick is figuring out how to make it work in the real world." Jake spent days programming the interface to understand Crix's thought patterns. The system had to learn the difference between conscious commands and random thoughts. It was delicate work that required hours of calibration and testing. The ship's engines came from 3 different sources. Jake combined a fusion reactor from a mining ship with thrusters from a racing yacht and a navigation computer from a military scout. The result was a propulsion system that was both powerful and efficient. "I have never seen anyone work like this," Crix told Jake one night as they took a break from testing. "Among my people, engineers work in teams of dozens. You are doing the work of an entire design bureau by yourself." "Sometimes it's easier to work alone," Jake said. "No committees. No arguments about the best approach, just me and the problem." As the ship neared completion, Jake realized he had created something truly revolutionary. The adaptive control system responded to Crix's thoughts and movements in ways that seemed almost magical. The alien could steer the ship by thinking about direction, control speed with small hand gestures, and operate all the ship's systems through mental commands. "We need to give her a name," Jake said as they stood looking at the completed ship. The small craft was sleek and purposeful, with a dark blue hull that reflected the garage lights. Crix was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I would like to call her Second Chance." "Perfect," Jake said. "Now let's see if she flies." The test flight was scheduled for the next morning. Jake had chosen a remote area outside the colony where they could test the ship without attracting attention. As dawn broke over New Denver, Jake and Crix loaded the final supplies into Second Chance and prepared for the moment of truth. Crix settled into the pilot's chair, and Jake helped him connect the neural interface. The alien's hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the control surfaces, and Jake could see both excitement and fear in his eyes. "Remember," Jake said, "start with simple thoughts. Think about lifting off gently, and the ship will respond. Don't try to force it." Crix nodded and closed his eyes, focusing on the mental commands Jake had taught him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, Second Chance began to rise from the ground. The ship's engines hummed quietly as it lifted into the morning sky. Jake watched from the ground as Crix took his first flight in months. The ship moved smoothly through the air, responding to the alien's thoughts as if it were an extension of his own body. Jake could see Crix's face through the cockpit window, and the expression of pure joy there made all the sleepless nights worth it. When Second Chance landed 20 minutes later, Crix was crying. He sat in the pilot's chair for several minutes, unable to speak. Finally, he looked at Jake through the open cockpit. "I thought I would never fly again," he said. "You have given me back my life." Jake smiled and patted the ship's hull. "You gave me the challenge of a lifetime. I should be thanking you." Neither of them realized that their test flight had been monitored by sensors throughout the system. The unique energy signature of Second Chance had been detected and analyzed by computers that were always watching for unusual technology within. Hours, reports would reach military headquarters, and Jake's quiet life was about to change forever. Jake woke up 3 days later to the sound of thunder. At least, he thought it was thunder until he realized the sky was perfectly clear. The deep rumbling sound was coming from outside his garage, and it was getting louder by the second. He stumbled out of bed and looked through his small apartment window. What he saw made him freeze in shock. A massive military cruiser was descending toward his property, its enormous hull blocking out the morning sun. The ship was at least 10 times larger than anything Jake had ever seen land on New Denver. "What in the world?" Jake muttered, pulling on his clothes as fast as he could. The cruiser settled onto the open ground next to his garage with a final blast of its landing thrusters. The ship was so big that it made his entire business look like a toy. Jake ran downstairs and stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the dust and debris kicked up by the landing. The cruiser's hull was dark gray with military markings he didn't recognize. Along the side he could see the name Uns Defiant painted in large white letters. A loading ramp descended from the ship's belly, and Jake watched nervously as several figures in military uniforms walked down. The leader was a woman with short brown hair and the confident stride of someone used to command. Behind her came two men in engineering uniforms and another woman carrying what looked like a tablet computer. "Are you Jake Morrison?" the leader called out as she approached. Her voice was firm but not unfriendly. "That's me," Jake said, his mouth suddenly dry. "Is there a problem, officer?" The woman smiled and extended her hand. "I'm Captain Lisa Barnes of the United Nations Space Command. We're here to discuss your recent work on an adaptive spacecraft design." Jake's heart sank. He had hoped that his test flight with Crix had gone unnoticed, but apparently the military had been watching. "Am I in trouble?" "Not at all," Captain Barnes said. "In fact, we're here because we're very interested in what you've accomplished." "May we see the ship you built?" Jake hesitated. Second Chance was parked in the back of his garage, and he wasn't sure he wanted to show it to military officers. But refusing would probably make things worse. "I suppose so. But I should mention that the ship belongs to a friend of mine." "We understand," Captain Barnes said. "We're not here to confiscate anything. We just want to learn more about your innovative control system." Jake led the group into his garage, where Second Chance sat gleaming under the overhead lights. The military officers examined the ship with obvious interest, taking notes and asking detailed questions about its construction. "This is remarkable work," said one of the engineers, a man named Lieutenant Clark. "The neural interface integration is unlike anything we've seen before. How did you manage to make it so responsive?" "Lots of trial and error," Jake said. "And a very patient test pilot." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Crix appeared at the garage entrance. He was using the wheeled cart Jake had built for him, but he moved with much more confidence than he had a few days ago. The successful test flight had restored some of his pride and dignity. "Jake, I heard the noise and came to see what was happening," Crix said, then stopped when he saw the military officers. "I apologize for interrupting." "Not at all," Captain Barnes said, stepping forward. "You must be the pilot Jake built this." "Ship 4, I'm Captain Barnes." Crix nodded politely. "I am Crix of the Zephyrian people. Jake has done something amazing for me." "So we've heard," Captain Barnes said. "Would you mind showing us how the control system works?" Crix looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. The alien moved his cart over to Second Chance and, with Jake's help, settled into the pilot's chair. He connected the neural interface headset and placed his hands on the control surfaces. "The ship responds to my thoughts," Crix explained as the control panels came to life. "I think about turning left, and the ship prepares to turn left. I think about increasing speed, and the engines respond. It is like the ship has become part of my body." The military officers watched in fascination as Crix demonstrated the system. The ship's engines hummed softly, and the control surfaces moved in response to his mental commands. It was clear that they had never seen anything like it. "Incredible," Captain Barnes said. "Jake, do you mind if we speak privately for a moment?" Jake nodded and followed the captain outside, leaving Crix with the other officers. Captain Barnes walked a short distance away from the garage before turning to face him. "Jake, I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "What you've created here could change the course of military operations throughout human space. We have hundreds of experienced pilots who have been grounded due to injuries. This technology could put them back in the cockpit." "I built this ship to help a friend," Jake said carefully. "I wasn't thinking about military applications." "I understand that," Captain Barnes said, "but the potential is enormous. We've been monitoring communications about your work, and we're prepared to offer you a substantial contract to develop this technology for the Space Command." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of contract?" "We want you to work with our engineers to create a production version of your adaptive control system. We're talking about retrofitting existing ships and designing new ones specifically for disabled pilots. The financial compensation would be significant. And if I say no?" Captain Barnes smiled. "Then you say no. We're not here to force you into anything, Jake, but I hope you'll consider the good this technology could do. There are people throughout the galaxy who could benefit from what you've created." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about the implications. Building one ship for Crix had been a labor of love, but mass-producing the technology for military use was something entirely different. Can I think about it? Of course, Captain Barnes said, but I'd like to ask you to consider something. Come back to the ship with me and meet someone? Jake followed her up the ramp into the Defiant. The interior was impressive, with clean lines and efficient design. Captain Barnes led him to a medical bay where a young man in a wheelchair was waiting. Jake, this is Lieutenant Ben Carter, Captain Barnes said. He was one of our best fighter pilots until his ship was damaged in a battle with pirates 6 months ago. Ben, tell Jake about your situation. Lieutenant Carter looked up at Jake with tired eyes. I've been flying since I was 18, he said. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do. When my ship was hit, debris crushed my legs and damaged my spine. The doctor saved my life, but they told me I'd never fly again. I'm sorry, Jake said softly. The thing is, Lieutenant Carter continued, there are dozens of pilots like me. Good people who got hurt doing their jobs and now have to watch from the sidelines. If your technology works like Captain Barnes says it does, we could be useful. Again, Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had built Second Chance to help one alien, but apparently his invention could help many more people. I need to discuss this with my partner, he said finally. Your partner? Captain Barnes asked. Crix, he's the one who inspired this whole project. I won't make any decisions without talking to him first, Captain Barnes nodded approvingly. I respect that. Take all the time you need. They returned to the garage, where Crix was still demonstrating the control system to the fascinated engineers. Jake asked to speak with him privately, and they moved to a quiet corner of the garage. The military wants to buy our technology, Jake explained. They want to use it to help their injured pilots return to service. Crix listened carefully as Jake described the conversation with Captain Barnes. When Jake finished, the alien was quiet for a long moment. Among my people, such. A decision would be easy, Crix said finally. We would reject any offer that involved helping other species, but I have learned much from watching you work. You do not see barriers between different kinds of people. You see problems that need solving. What do you think we should do? Jake asked. I think, Crix said slowly, that your invention should not be limited to helping just one disabled alien. If it can help others like Lieutenant Carter, then perhaps we have a responsibility to share it. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of relief. But I want to make sure it's done right. If we're going to work with the military, we need to set some conditions. What kind of conditions? The technology has to be shared with other species, not just humans. And some of the ships have to be used for peaceful purposes, not just military ones. I want to make sure this helps people like you, not just soldiers. Crix smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from him since they met. You continue to surprise me, Jake Morrison. Most people would simply take the money and not worry about the consequences. I'm not most people, Jake said. Are you willing to be my partner in this? I would be honored, Crix said. They walked back to where Captain Barnes was waiting with her team. Jake could see the hope in Lieutenant Carter's eyes, and he knew he had made the right decision. Captain Barnes, Jake said, Crix and I are interested in your offer, but we have some conditions we'd like to discuss. Captain Barnes smiled. I'm listening. As Jake began to outline his requirements, he realized that his quiet life as a small-town mechanic was about to change forever. But looking at Crix's proud expression and remembering Lieutenant Carter's hopeful face, he knew that some changes were worth making. 1 week later, Jake's quiet garage had been transformed into something that looked like a military research facility. Engineers from the Space Command had arrived with trucks full of equipment, computers, and testing devices. They had set up workstations throughout the building and were studying every detail of Second Chance's design. Jake felt overwhelmed by all the activity. He was used to working alone or with one helper, not managing a team of 12 military engineers. The lead engineer, Colonel Patricia Webb, was a sharp woman who asked difficult questions and demanded precise answers about every component of the adaptive control system. The neural interface response time is impressive, Colonel Webb said. as she reviewed Jake's design notes. But we need to understand exactly how you calibrated it for alien brain patterns. Human neural activity might require different settings. That's why we need to test it with different species, Jake said. Every brain works a little differently, so the system has to be flexible enough to adapt. Crix had become an essential part of the development team. He spent hours each day testing the control system and helping the engineers understand how it felt to pilot a ship with thought commands. His knowledge of Zephyrian technology also proved valuable, as his people had developed some advanced sensor systems that could be integrated with Jake's design. The hardest part, Crix explained to the team during one of their daily meetings, is learning to trust the system. For the first few flights, I kept trying to use controls that were not there. My mind expected to feel pedals under my feet, but there were none. It takes time to develop new habits. Lieutenant Carter had also joined the team. The military had flown him to New Denver so he could test the system himself. Jake had spent 3 days modifying a training simulator to work with his adaptive controls, and Carter was making good progress learning to pilot with thought commands. "It's amazing," Carter said after his first successful simulation flight. "I can feel the ship responding to my intentions almost before I'm fully aware of what I want to do. It's like the ship is reading my mind." "In a way it is," Jake said. "The neural interface picks up brain signals that happen just before conscious thought. That's what makes the response time so fast, but not everything was going smoothly." Jake was having serious doubts about some of the military's plans for his technology. During a meeting with Colonel Webb, she mentioned that they wanted to install the adaptive controls in fighter ships designed for combat operations. "I'm not comfortable with that," Jake said firmly. "I'd built this system to help disabled people fly again, not to create better weapons." Colonel Webb looked surprised by his objection. "Mr. Morrison, these fighter ships would be used for defensive purposes. Pirates and hostile alien groups pose a real threat to civilian shipping. Don't you want to protect innocent people?" "Of course I do," Jake said. "But I also don't want my invention to be used to start wars." The argument continued for over an hour, with neither side willing to compromise. Finally, Captain Barnes arrived from her ship to help resolve the conflict. She listened carefully to both Jake's concerns and Colonel Webb's military requirements. "Jake, I understand your hesitation," Captain Barnes said. "But I think you're looking at this the wrong way. Your technology isn't creating new weapons. It's giving disabled veterans the chance to serve their communities again. Many of these pilots would be flying defensive missions, protecting trade routes and civilian colonies." Jake was still not convinced. "How do I know the technology won't be misused? What happens if someone uses these ships to attack innocent people?" Crix, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Jake, may I tell you something about my people's history?" Jake nodded, curious to hear what his alien friend had to say. 200 years ago, the Zephyrians developed a new type of mining laser. "That was very powerful," Crix said. "Some of our leaders wanted to keep the technology secret, fearing it could be used as a weapon. But other species were developing similar tools, and some of them were less careful about how they used them." "What happened?" Jake asked. "Eventually, we decided to share our laser technology with peaceful species, but only under strict agreements about its use. By controlling how the technology was distributed, we were able to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands." "Perhaps you could do something similar." Captain Barnes nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we're proposing, Jake. We want to establish strict guidelines for how the adaptive control technology is used. Only qualified pilots with clean records would be allowed to use it, and every ship would be monitored to ensure it's not being misused." Jake thought about this for a moment. "What about sharing the technology with other species? I don't want this to become something that only benefits humans." "We've already discussed that with our allies," Captain Barnes said. "The Centaurian Federation has expressed interest in testing the system with their disabled pilots, and several other species have made similar requests. We're prepared to share the technology with any peaceful government that agrees to our usage guidelines." After 3 more days of negotiations, Jake and Crix finally reached an agreement with the military. The contract they signed was unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. He would work with the Space Command to develop 3 different versions of the adaptive control system. The first version would be designed for civilian use, allowing disabled individuals to pilot personal spacecraft and small cargo ships. These systems would be made available to anyone who could demonstrate a legitimate need. Regardless of their species or planet of origin, the second version would be used for rescue and humanitarian operations. Ships equipped with these systems would be used to respond to emergencies, deliver medical supplies, and evacuate people from dangerous situations. Jake was particularly excited about this application, as it aligned perfectly with his desire to help people. The third version would be used for defensive military operations only. These systems would be installed in ships tasked with protecting civilian trade routes and colony worlds from pirates and other threats. Strict oversight would ensure that they were never used for aggressive military actions. "I'm still not completely comfortable with the military applications," Jake admitted to Crix as they reviewed the final contract. "But I think we've done everything we can to make sure the technology is used responsibly. You have created something that will help thousands of people across the galaxy," Crix said. "That is what matters most. Sometimes we cannot control how others use our inventions, but we can try to guide them in the right direction." The signing ceremony took place in Jake's garage, with Captain Barnes, Colonel Webb, and several other military officials in attendance. Jake felt nervous as he put his signature on the documents, knowing that this moment would change his life forever. "Congratulations, Mr. Morrison," Captain Barnes said as she shook his hand. "You've just made history. This technology will save lives and give hope to people who thought they would never fly again." As part of the agreement, Jake's garage would be expanded into a full research and development facility. The military would provide funding for new equipment, additional staff, and a much larger workspace. Crix would be officially hired as a consultant and test pilot, giving him a steady income and a chance to contribute to something meaningful. "What do you think comes next?" Jake asked Crix as they watched the military officers pack up their equipment. "I think," Crix said with a smile, "that we are about to become very busy. Word of this technology will spread quickly throughout the galaxy. Soon, disabled beings from many worlds will be coming here, hoping for their own second chance." Jake looked around his garage, trying to imagine it filled with alien visitors seeking help. The idea was both exciting and intimidating. "Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" "I am ready if you are," Crix said. "We make a good team, Jake Morrison. You have the engineering skills, and I understand what it feels like to lose the ability to fly. Together, we can help more people than either of us could alone." That evening, after all the military personnel had left, Jake and Crix sat in the quiet garage and looked at Second Chance. The little ship that had started as a simple act of kindness was about to become the prototype for a technology that would change lives throughout the galaxy. "I never imagined that helping one person could lead to something this big," Jake said. "That is how all great changes begin," Crix replied. "One person decides to help another, and the effects spread outward like ripples in water." "You threw the first stone, Jake. Now we get to watch the ripples reach every corner of the galaxy." As Jake turned off the lights and locked up the garage, he realized that his days as a small-town mechanic were truly over. Tomorrow, he would begin work on a project that could transform space travel for disabled beings everywhere. It was a responsibility he had never asked for, but one he was determined to handle with the same care and dedication he had shown when building Second Chance for a desperate alien who had dragged himself through the rain to ask for help. 6 months had passed since Jake signed the contract with the Space Command, and his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. What had once been a small garage on the edge of New Denver was now the Morrison Adaptive Technologies Research Center, a sprawling complex of buildings that employed over 200 people from dozens of different species. Jake stood at the window of his new office, watching as the first production squadron of adaptive fighters prepared for their maiden flight. The sleek ships bore little resemblance to Second Chance, but they carried the same revolutionary control system that had started it all. Each ship was piloted by someone who had once been told they would never fly again. "The final tests are complete," Crick said as he rolled his wheelchair into the office. The alien had undergone surgery to replace his improvised cart with a proper mobility device, and he now served as the director of pilot training for the facility. All 12 pilots have passed their certification flights. Jake smiled as he watched Lieutenant Carter climb out of one of the fighters. The young man had been the first human to successfully adapt to the neural interface system, and he was now leading the training program for other disabled military pilots. His face glowed with the joy that only came from returning to the work he loved. "How many applications do we have for the civilian program?" Jake asked. "Over 3,000, Crix replied. "Beings from 47 different worlds have requested adaptive control systems. The waiting list grows longer every day." Jake felt a mixture of pride and concern. The success of his invention had exceeded his wildest dreams, but the demand was overwhelming. They were building ships as fast as they could, but it would take years to help everyone who needed assistance. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Captain Barnes entered, now wearing the insignia of an admiral. Her promotion had come, partly because of the success of the adaptive technology program, which had already proven its value in several rescue operations. "Jake, I have some news I think you'll want to hear," Admiral Barnes said with a smile. "The first humanitarian mission using your technology was completed yesterday. What happened?" Jake asked, settling into his chair. "A cargo ship carrying medical supplies was attacked by pirates near the Vega system," Admiral Barnes explained. "The crew was killed, but they managed to send a distress signal before their ship was disabled. A rescue squadron equipped with adaptive fighters responded to the call." She pulled out a tablet and showed Jake a video recording from the mission. On the screen, he could see 3 sleek fighters approaching a damaged cargo vessel. The pilots moved with precision and skill, despite the fact that all 3 were operating their ships through neural interfaces. The rescue was led by Commander Maria Santos, Admiral Barnes continued. "She lost both legs in a shuttle accident 2 years ago and thought her flying career was over. Yesterday, she saved 43 civilians from that cargo ship." Jake watched the video with growing amazement. Commander Santos guided her fighter through a complex docking maneuver that would have been challenging for any pilot. The fact that she was doing it with thought commands made it even more impressive. "The pirates never expected to encounter military fighters in that sector," Admiral Barnes said. "When they saw Santos and her squadron approaching, they fled without firing. A shot. Sometimes the best weapon is simply being there when people need help." After Admiral Barnes left, Jake walked through the research center to see how the various projects were progressing. In one building, engineers were working on a new version of the neural interface designed specifically for the 4-armed Rigelian species. In another, test pilots from 6 different worlds were learning to use the adaptive controls in a sophisticated simulator. The civilian program had been especially successful. Jake had insisted that the basic adaptive control system be made available at cost to anyone who could demonstrate a genuine need. They had helped former miners who had been injured in accidents, cargo pilots who had suffered strokes, and even a famous racing pilot who had lost her legs in a crash, but refused to give up her dream of flying, one of Jake's favorite success. Stories was a young Centaurian named Zek who had been born without functional legs. On his homeworld, Zek would have been limited to ground-based work, but the adaptive control system had allowed him to become a cargo pilot. He now flew supply runs between the outer colonies, earning enough money to support his entire extended family. "Jake, we have visitors," Crix announced as he approached. "The delegation from the Andromedan Council has arrived for their evaluation." Jake had been expecting this visit for weeks. The Andromedan Council represented over 200 species from the neighboring galaxy, and they were considering adopting the adaptive technology for their own disabled citizens. If the negotiations went well, Jake's invention would spread far beyond human space. The delegation consisted of 5 beings from different species, each with their own unique physiology and communication methods. The leader was Ambassador Thizes, a tall, crystalline being who spoke through harmonic vibrations that were translated by a universal communication device. "Mr. Morrison," Ambassador Thizes said, her translated voice carrying formal dignity, "we have observed your work from afar and are impressed by what you have accomplished. The Council wishes to understand how this technology might be adapted for our citizens." Jake spent the next 3 hours explaining the adaptive control system and demonstrating its flexibility. The beauty of the neural interface was that it could be calibrated for almost any type of brain activity, regardless of the species involved. The mechanical controls could also be modified to accommodate different types of limbs and appendages. Our preliminary test suggests that the system could work for at least 80% of the species in our council, one of the delegates reported. This could help millions of disabled beings who have never had the opportunity to travel between stars. The negotiations continued for several days, with both sides working out the details of technology transfer and licensing agreements. Jake insisted on the same conditions he had demanded from the human military. The technology would be used only for peaceful purposes, and strict oversight would prevent any misuse. When the agreement was finally signed, Jake realized that his invention had truly become a galactic phenomenon. Ships equipped with adaptive controls would soon be flying in 2 different galaxies, helping beings he would never meet pursue dreams they had thought were impossible. That evening, Jake and Crix sat in the original garage, which had been preserved as a museum within the larger research complex. Second Chance still sat in the center of the space, polished and maintained but no longer used for active flights. It had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when someone refused to accept that a problem was unsolvable. "Do you ever miss the simple days?" Crix asked as they looked at the small ship that had started everything. "When it was just you and me working on an impossible project?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Life was definitely quieter back then. But when I think about all the people we've helped, I know we made the right choice." "I received a message today from my homeworld," Crix sighed quietly. "The Zephyrian Mining Guild wants to purchase 50 adaptive control systems for their disabled workers. They are calling it a new policy of inclusion and rehabilitation." Jake stared at his friend in surprise. "Your people are changing their minds about disability?" "It appears so," Crix said with a smile. "When they learned that a disabled Zephyrian had helped develop technology that was being used throughout the galaxy, they began to reconsider their old ways. They realized that discarding injured workers was wasteful and cruel." "That's incredible news," Jake said. "It means you'll be able to go home again," Crix shook his head. "This is my home now, Jake. I have work here that matters and friends who value me for who I am. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't work yourself to death trying to help everyone in the galaxy." Jake laughed, knowing that Crix was probably right. The requests for help kept coming from every corner of known space, and Jake had trouble saying no to anyone who needed assistance. With Crix as his partner, though, he felt confident that they could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. "What do you think will happen next?" Jake asked. "I think," Crix said thoughtfully, "that we have only seen the beginning. Your invention has shown the galaxy that disability does not mean inability. That idea will spread far beyond spacecraft technology. Soon, disabled beings everywhere will be demanding the right to pursue their dreams, and society will have to change to accommodate them." As Jake locked up the museum garage and headed home to his apartment, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that rainy night when a desperate alien had dragged himself to his door. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something that was transforming civilizations across 2 galaxies. The next morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities to help people who had been told they could never reach for the stars. Jake looked forward to every one of them. After all, he was still a mechanic at heart, and the galaxy was full of problems that needed fixing.